So when I look at what's happening, I see something that's not just about Afghanistan. I see it as part of a concerted effort to strengthen and better fund and essentially create a much more effective and influential Canadian forces. One that's, sadly enough, not designed to do peacekeeping missions, even though the United Nations is involved in more peacekeeping missions than ever before, but sadly is designed to fight increasingly counterinsurgency missions alongside the United States. It's not, I should say as a slight tangent, designed to protect Canada either. You'll remember Stephen Harper's promise of 3 new icebreakers almost exactly a year ago to protect Canadian sovereignty in the Arctic. Those have disappeared. No icebreakers. It's increasingly about Afghanistan. It's increasingly about a hard-edged, war-fighting Canadian forces. And it's all part of this lobbying effort that stretches back more than a decade now. I want to read you just a couple of lines from a news report from Kandahar province that came out on September 16th, 2006. I'm quoting here. "The losses are gnawing away at Canadian confidence. What struck me was just how many doubts the Canadian soldiers seem plagued by. What are they in Afghanistan for? I was asked a number of times. Is it worth the lives of friends and colleagues? Crouching in a gully, Corporal Brad Kilcup confided, all the guys out here, the only thing they think about is getting home safe. A small man, his face caked with dirt, he fidgeted nervously with his gun." That was not a Canadian journalist reporting. That was David Grammaticus from the BBC World Service. Now, I heard this on the World Service. I listened to the World Service over the internet from time to time. I went and I found it on the BBC website, and I proceeded to send it to some of my friends in the media and a couple of political parties too. And it wasn't picked up by anyone. I went back a few weeks later. I said, "Well, why didn't someone pick this up? This is pretty good reporting. It's important. Canadian soldiers in the field have got serious doubts about what they're doing there." "Oh no, we wouldn't want to do that because we need to support the troops." It's not a news story that people want out there because it somehow suggests that we don't support our troops to report that they're unhappy. I mean, it's okay to question what the generals are doing. It's okay to question what the politicians are doing, but please do not report that our troops might be unhappy. Somehow this is unpatriotic. Somehow this is unfair. Or maybe the worry is, and this did not come up, but maybe the worry is what would happen to the soldier if it was reported that he had said this when his generals read this, or his comrades or his sergeant read this. Anyway, it doesn't get out. And I think that this is partly because we have inculcated ourselves through this lobbying effort over the last decade or so to actually want a stronger, more militaristic, aggressive military, that we want a kind of patriotism that's going to be imbued with this, that we're not going to ask the difficult sorts of questions. I mean, it's remarkable that somewhere around 58% of Canadians think that the Canadian soldiers in the counterinsurgency mission in Kandahar province should be withdrawn back to Canada before 2009. There's a CBC poll and Veronique's poll a couple weeks ago that showed that. There are other polls. 59% of Canadians think the mission is failing, according to the same poll. Those are remarkable numbers given the kind of PR machine that's been operating in favor of Rick Hillier and Stephen Harper and the rest. Truly remarkable numbers. And of course, the media is a business. I was on a panel earlier today with Kirk LaPointe, who actually made the point. He said, look, we're a business, right? We have to sell newspapers. Well, because of that, any newspaper, any private media outlet is going to be responsive over time to what its readers actually think, what its viewers think, what its listeners think, over time, no matter what the views of the proprietors might be. So the Globe's very clear here, okay? For the first half of this year, very much supportive of the mission in Kandahar. almost unquestionably supportive of the mission in Afghanistan. Well, how things change. Just 9 days ago, November 15th, 2006, the fight is 5 years old. And it now appears that General Hillier was being optimistic when he placed a lower limit of 10 years on the time needed to help Afghanistan's fledgling democracy survive. More than 3,700 people have been killed this year in fighting in that country. Violence is up fourfold over last year. Roadside bombs and suicide attacks are at record levels. The opium trade is flourishing. It is legitimate to return again and again, in light of changing circumstances, to questions and to a full and frank discussion of the Canadian interest in being in Afghanistan. Noble the fight is, but is it winnable? Can a victory be sustained once the West leaves? How hard is Canada pushing for greater support from other NATO countries? How much more is the United States prepared to do in Afghanistan if and when its troops begin to withdraw from Iraq? And then it ends, quote, "The Canadian government should not cut and run at the first sign of hard questions." The globe's halfway through a 180-degree turn. I mean, it's like they've realized that we are in a hole in Afghanistan, and they don't want to be stuck in the bottom of it with the editorial policy. Or maybe they've calculated that Bob Rae might win. Or maybe it's actually simpler than that. Maybe Marcus G. is now on his one-year fellowship at the Monk Center, and we now have an adult writing the editorial page of the Globe and Mail. I don't know, but you see, part of what's happening here is that the media is responding to the fact that despite their best efforts, the defense lobby and the military have failed to convince the majority of Canadians about this. And having failed to do that, they are losing the media now. One final caveat before I close, and that's about our dear old CBC. CBC is not a private business. CBC does worry about ratings. But the CBC also depends on an annual basis for the federal government to decide how much money it's going to get. I don't know how many of you saw Peter Mansbridge's last interview with Stephen Harper before the election in January, where Mr. Mansbridge did not ask the Conservative leader a single difficult question. There's been some good reporting done on the CBC. I thought Patrick Brown in Kandahar was phenomenal. But there's also, I think, been a tendency to pull a lot of punches. And that's another question that we need to talk about when we talk about the media in Canada. Is our public broadcaster, and how closely dependent it is on the public purse and decisions about its funding on an annual basis. The BBC budget is set, I believe, once every 7 years. And then it's locked in stone for 7 years. NPR in the United States is funded almost entirely from non-government money, mostly through fundraising drives, and now a very benevolent donor. I think that the CBC and its reporting is also absolutely crucial. And maybe one of the things that we'll learn as a result of this war, and hopefully not future wars, is that if we want to have a truly lively and rigorous media in this country, one of the things we need is a CBC that's actually protected from the government and its vindictiveness if the CBC starts to ask too many difficult questions with regards to any particular situation in Afghanistan or elsewhere. Thank you.